Your sacrifices cannot save you. Your fasting cannot save you. Your prayer cannot save you. And he went further in Galatians chapter 4 to let them know. He said, your ancestors did it for 1,500 years. Not one of them was saved. He went further to tell them, he said, there is none righteous. No, not one. Because the righteousness of man is as a filthy rag before God. So when you come into grace, what do? You rest. You depend on God. You rely on God. Grace teaches you how to depend on God completely. When you have understood the gospel of grace, the proof of that understanding is that you depend on God completely. And when God takes over, the excellency of the kingdom begins to find expression through you. That is where life can take place. Hope you know that when God wanted to bring something out of Adam, he knew if the man was awake, it would be impossible. He would have been asking, why are you removing my rib? Which one are you removing? Will I still be strong? How will you make the woman? He struck him sleep. When the man slept, he woke up and saw a woman. And the surprising thing is that he knew. He said, this is the bone of my bone, the flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. How did she know? That means God did not necessarily stop his consciousness, but God stopped his mobility. Because every time you are walking by your ability, you are limiting grace. When you understand the gospel of grace, you suspend your ability so that divine ability can find expression. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. It's the power of God through that brings salvation to everyone. The grace of God that bringeth salvation has appeared to all men. Why do you think when you wanted to receive Christ, all you needed to do was, I believe? I believe. I believe. How can I believe affect you who is a murderer? How can I believe change a man who stole from people? How can I believe change the fortune of a rapist? Because the grace will not work until you surrender. So the summary of the gospel of grace is surrender. Believe in Jesus so that the power of Christ can find expression through you. As you surrender, life begins to flow through you. That life will help you to begin to live the blueprint of the Father. And finally, you have the gospel of the Son, or the gospel of Christ. What is the gospel of Christ? The gospel of Christ is the organic source of grace. The whole idea of the gospel of Christ is that grace is not a system that exists on its own. The whole idea of the gospel of Christ is that grace flows out of a person. Because you can be interacting with grace and assume that grace is a technology. You can be interacting with grace and assume that grace is a principle. You can be interacting with grace and assume that grace is a method. The gospel of Christ comes to let you know that grace is not a method. Grace is not a principle. Grace is not a technology. That grace is a person. Because somebody else may not come to Jesus, but he may just say, I believe in God, and expect to see the power of God. We don't just believe in God to see the power of God. We believe in God made flesh in the person of Jesus Christ. That is why only us who believe in Jesus have access to the grace of God. You can believe in God and have one or two interventions, because God is the Father of all spirit and the Father of all flesh. But if you want to walk the grace of God, you must believe in the God made flesh. That's why Paul explained it in this order. Romans chapter 1. Let's read verse 1. Let's read verse 3 and 4. And then let's read verse 9 and verse 16. You are going to see the way Paul builds it. Because many people argue today, and you hear things like, if I don't receive Jesus, does that mean I will not be saved? Are you trying to say that the millions of people who did not accept Jesus, they will go to hell? Yes, they will. Jesus said, I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. If he said, I am a way, it would have implied that there are other ways. He said, I am the way. That means there is no other way apart from me. You now say, how about those who lived before Jesus came? The Bible said in 1 Peter 3:19 that he went to the grave and preached to them. In Ephesians chapter 4 verse 11, those who believed him, in fact from verse 8, he said he led captivity captive. So those who lived before him, when he went to the grave, he preached to them. The ones that believe, he set them free. Because when Jesus had not come, there was a promissory note. That's why every Jewish man knows that the Messiah is coming. Because they know that the hope of humanity is a person. And so they preach the coming of the Messiah. And when Jesus eventually came, even those who died before he was born, he went with the gospel to them in the grave. And he brought them out and saved them and gave them liberty and salvation. Because outside Jesus, there is no way to the Father. Grace is a person. Grace is not a system. Grace is not a technology. Grace is not a principle. Grace is a person. Its manifestation can be like a strategy, a system, or a principle. But fundamentally speaking, grace is a person. This is what reduces the summary of the gospel to a relationship with Jesus Christ. So if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, you have not known the gospel. This is why many Christians are frustrated. Look at the way Paul puts it. I'm trying to round up Romans. I'm just giving you outline. We will deal with all of those things in context and bring out truth from it that will empower you. Romans chapter 1 from verse 1. It says, Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle and separated unto the gospel of God. Are you seeing that? Go to verse 3. He called it the gospel of God in verse 1. Go to verse 3. He said concerning. What is the gospel of God? Concerning his son, Jesus Christ our Lord, which was made of the seed of David according to the flesh, and declared to be the Son of God by power through the Spirit of holiness by the resurrection from the dead. So the gospel of God is concerning what? Jesus made flesh, declared to be the Son of God through the resurrection from the dead. Why is that important? It's important because in the resurrection, Jesus released immortality. This is why salvation is possible in the first place. Because as he rose from the dead, he showed us that he had power over the grave.